Hello, welcome to Redline Tonight. Normally getting democracies to agree on anything is nearly impossible. The United States argues with Europe, Europe argues with itself, and Japan usually just bows politely and waits for the argument to end. So here's something you don't see every day. The United States, Japan, and the European Union finally agree on something. And no, it's not climate goals. It's not trade negotiations. It's not whose fault inflation is. When those three suddenly start saying the same thing about one country, that's not diplomacy. That's an alarm. Because this time, they're all talking about one thing. China is turning technology and the economy into weapons. More specifically, they're talking about chips. No, not potato chips. The kind that decide who gets to write the future. And who only get to live inside a future Beijing already scripted. For years, we used to imagine Chinese espionage like a spy movie. One guy in a trench coat stealing a USB stick in the rain. Cute. Well, that era is over. According to Western intel officials, including former Canadian Secretary Intelligence Service Director David Vinault, Beijing is now stealing technology on an industrial scale. This isn't a spy or two-god creative. This is national policy, hacking campaigns, academic exchanges, state-backed private equity funds buying chip companies.
David Vigneault of Canada.
We have seen in the past acquisition of land, acquisition of different companies, where when you start to dig a little bit further, you realize that there is another intent, and we have seen and blocked attempt by the PRC to acquire locations near sensitive strategic assets of the country, where we knew that the ultimate purpose was for spying operations.
It's not one person breaking into the lab at night. It's an entire system that treats your lab, your factory, and your safe campus as its overseas R&D department. And the funny part? The R&D budget is paid for by foreign taxpayers. Let's start with the place that was supposed to be the safest, the university campus. For decades, the US believed in this beautiful idea. If we bring students from authoritarian countries into free campuses, they'll go home inspired by freedom. Beijing heard that and said, great idea, we'll send more. But not just future poets and engineers, also future intelligence assets. We've already seen the patterns, like Chinese students caught photographing US military training grounds in Michigan, pretending they were just there to watch a meteor shower. A PLA officer, Ye Yinqing, allegedly lying on her US visa, calling herself a student while reporting back to a top Chinese military university. At Harvard and Boston labs, a Chinese researcher caught trying to smuggle cancer research in vials hidden in a sock. And a famous American professor convicted for hiding his China talent program money. And then there's the guy who flew back to China via Singapore with 6 NVIDIA A100 GPUs in his luggage. He knew about US export controls, but still told reporters he was
happy to do something for my country and make a little extra money.
What?
This is not one bad apple. This is Beijing turning the entire orchard into a collection system. To Beijing, that's patriotism. To Washington, that's not education. That's logistics. Because here's the trick. A lot of these projects are funded by US taxpayers. American money pays for basic research. Then Chinese talent programs, party links, scholarships, and friendship funds vacuum up the know-how and plug it straight into China's military-industrial complex. Open society thought it was exporting freedom. Turns out it's been exporting a free technology transfer package. If US campuses are Beijing's hunting ground for ideas, Europe's factories have become its hunting ground for execution. European car makers thought made in China just meant cheaper parts. Then came the Xperia mess. Dutch origin chip know-how, Chinese-controlled fabs. And suddenly, Beijing can quietly squeeze deliveries to Europe, demand contracts in RMB, and cut export volumes when it feels like it.
What?
That isn't normal business, that's leverage. So instead of just hacking networks and poaching engineers, Beijing picked a quieter and nastier route. Used capital, mergers, and supply chain dependence to turn other people's factories and technology into an offshore extension of its own system. And look at the pattern around packaging and power chips. Beijing-backed funds like Wise World Capital and JC Capital have spent years buying up global chip assets from NXP's Standard Products business, aka later Nexperia, to OSAT's factories in China, originally owned by Taiwan ASE. Nexperia, once a boring Dutch spin-off, turned into a key supplier of automotive chips. European car makers loved it, until Chinese owners started using the company like a political bargaining chip. When Dutch authorities moved to rein in Chinese control and protect the tech, Beijing struck back from the China-based plans, cutting shipments, demanding contracts in RMB, and insisting that the Chinese subsidiary has final say on who gets chips. Congratulations, Europe. You just discovered what economic weaponization looks like in a 300mm wafer form. Now bring this back to Taiwan. If Beijing can use one Dutch fruited chip company to squeeze Europe, what do you think it wants from the island that actually fabricates the world's most advanced chips? We've already seen the pieces on the board. PRC-backed firms poaching engineers from TSMC and other fabs. Retired engineers carrying process know-how across the strait. Mainland-linked money circling around OSAT. Small design houses and second-tier suppliers, stitching together a shadow supply chains that runs on Taiwanese brains, but answers to Beijing. With Beijing, and chip is never just business. It's a missile guidance system and a bargaining chip with Washington and Brussels. If it can't take Taiwan by force today, we'll try to hollow out the silicon shield from the inside until the day it can. Here's the uncomfortable truth. China isn't just stealing technology. When it turns campuses into Intel farms, scholarship into levers, and chip factories into hostages, when it's really taking away the free world's ability to choose its own future. If your AI chips depend on a regime that jails critics, if your cars depend on a supplier that can be weaponized overnight, the universities are too scared to even say the word espionage. You're not just buying cheap parts, you're importing vulnerability. So next time you hear about another Chinese scholarship program, another friendly fund buying a chip company, or another student just passing by a military base with a camera, ask one simple question. Is this really about education or about stripping leverage from you? Because in this story, the chips on the table aren't just silicon. They are our ability in the US, in Europe, in Taiwan, to live in societies where knowledge serves people, not a party state. If Taiwan's fabs are captured or hollowed out, the free world wouldn't just lose a supplier. It loses the last line between an open future and one written in Beijing.